So I've just got to my package collection and found this little beauty. So, a lovely little handwritten note from Keenan. A little dice bag, I'm guessing. It feels like dice. Lovely. So we've got special W dice there. That's directional. So I've had a look at how you run through this dungeon. So along with the Dungeon Sprint book, stickers and character sheets and trackers. That is a beautiful package. So obviously I'll be looking at the PDF version, but just to give you a sense of the book itself, it's a dungeon that you run through, and obviously it seems like the dice dictates. We've got the monster stats, and yeah, I guess this will go at the beginning of the video where I look through all of this. Okay, so let's look at this thing. This is the pre-release preview, so alterations and improvements are to be expected. So game design, Keenan Antos, and there's going to be an interview with him at the end of this video. Talks about the inspirations, first edition D&D, Morkborg, Hero Quest, Shadow Dark, and contents we can skip straight to starting out what you need. 8-sided dice. You get little hero cards, which you've probably seen already. Can be solo, gridded maps if necessary. Dice pools, so the better you are at something, the more d8s you roll. In the way that you do percentage die, a d10 and a d10s in D&D, this is a d8 and a d8. The first is a 10, the second is a unit. So it's a d88, so it's not really a percentile at all. Ripping and crypting. When an 8 is rolled at the maximum, it is tallied as a success and re-rolled. If another 8 is rolled, it's counted as a success. Exploding dice, if you roll the maximum, if you got a crit 20 and a crit 20 and a crit 20, it's like better things happen. But it's counting successes, and those are just extra spectacular, basically. When a 1 is rolled, it's a failure, obviously. And tallied as a failure and re-rolled. You've nat-1'd, essentially. Hero creation. So, nice and simple. You set your abilities, you choose a fate path, which is 4 different styles, like a wizard and a barbarian. They would be 2 kind of different paths. Select your skills, what do you want to increase, get some gear, and we're off. So all your scores are 1 as a base, first level sort of thing. Grit, gait, grip, and glim. Grit is for strength, so digging in. Grip is for leadership and influence and morale in combat. Gait is for how you stand, which is what gait means, isn't it? How you hold yourself, sort of thing. And so that's the movement aspect of your character. And glim is just a word for magic, glimcraft. So that's it. That's all you got to remember, those 4. And I'm sure they'll become rather easy to remember. This is the character sheet. Nice and simple. Fate we'll get to. That's that character type. Classes, if you like. Your weapons, your stats, guts, health points, movement, walk 4, run 8, squares, I think it means. Armor class split into different parts of the body. So if you have 1 gait, if your gait is 1, that's a move of 4 and a run of 8. If your gait is 3, you've upped it, then you get 6, so you know that's the table for that equation. News heroes start with 5 guts. The compass points are the type of character you're playing. North is, could we say paladin type? Is that maybe fair? East is druidic almost. I'm not certain that that's what they were going for. That's how you might imagine it. And then there's a east equals, and then the character sheet gets filled in accordingly, step by step. South, what would south be? Natural leaders, bard, and then west is magic wizards sort of thing. That's a general look at it. And with each path you take, you get certain abilities. If you choose the northern path, select 2 skills for your grit ability. Otherwise, just roll 1 grit skill. Everyone who's not on the northern path just automatically gets 1 in grit. Otherwise, if you are on that path, you can choose 2. So standard of 1, choice of 2 if that's your path. And then breaks down what each skill means, which is standard stuff in idea. Your metal, Your stout build allows you to carry weight without burden. Equip heavy armour in a chosen location with no move penalty. And that is each armour class location around your body, I believe. Rage means you can re-roll some dice, and so you can pick and choose what you want to be able to do, and that's just out of your 1 grit skills. So then it moves on to gait, which is movement. So things that will be able to make your movement more creative and grip. And so it goes through the 4 different, glims magic. And there's words like focus, flex, fract to sort of learn what it does. Disrupt and disperse whatever with your spell craft. Thin glim is like a thin magic, what I think most people are able to do, perhaps, was the idea I was told. So then you write on your skills, because this one's obviously taken this path, so they get 2 and a standard 1 in all the others. A little bit of gold, a little bit of copper. A delve kit. So if you're a northern person, you can add 1d8 gold coins. If you're a northern person, you get an exploration kit. Quite simple. I think that's what they were aiming for. Got an armour class on body and arms, so that piece of armour, and no helmet, no leggings or boots, etc. There we are, no on the armour, no legs, nothing on the head. Well, no armour on the legs. Heroes can carry up to 12 items and 4 weapons. Armour does not require gear slots. But if heavy armour is equipped in all 4 body locations, you lose 2 points of movement. That makes sense. The turns into 3 phases. Nice art. So, this first phase, the fate phase, it's turn 1. So you put a d8 with a 1 showing. And then the trial difficulty basically sets what DCs you're looking for, and they go up in 4 step stages for how hard. Deadly, so they do that in D&D. Easy, moderate, whatever, deadly, And then you roll for fate. And it goes on to explain these. Action. Heroes take actions following fate in an order of compass points. It goes around the table. People who are of the northern persuasion, it sort of says you can sit on the northern end of the table and the southerns sit on the south. And the order of play goes round in that. So, and the monsters have sides as well. So they would be imaginarily sat on that side of the table. So you know whose turn it is when. So here are your 3 dice. Yeah, you've got your what turn it is, number 1, how hard it is, 5, and 8 is the fate. You roll for fate. The keeper rolls d8, visible to all players. Now, if this matches your path, I think you get buffed. I could be wrong. And this is a turn of play. People, north goes first, then east, then south, then west. But maybe that die actually says where the turns start. So it could be west first, and then it's north, and then it's... So it goes round compass points. Just to try and make things a little faster, I think. Free actions. Trial actions is like acting with the environment. To climb, to hide, to search. Rival actions are the NPC, enemy, monster actions. You compare scores with the rival, so you would both look at is the same as the rivals, then it's a normal target of 5, difficult DC is 2 or more below, then it's hard and the DC is 7. And, the bigger your dice pool, I suppose the easier it is to get to the numbers you need. If any event pool dice results in an 8, you count up the dice, let's say 5, a stranger appears, then you roll on a table of person of interest. Coin flip during initiative, so if there's monsters and you're on the north end of the table, flip a coin. Do the players go first or do the monsters act first in the north phase? If monsters are at, or anyone I think, but certainly monsters, if they're at half hit points, they may turn and run, or they may go crazy. Combat. Moving when on a gridded area, it's 10 feet rather than 5. Flying, falling, terrain effects, impassable ground, some terrain DC here for how to climb, athletics check kind of idea, whatever. So here's some DCs against rivals, and if you have the edge is granted to you and it drops the DC down by 1. If you are disadvantaged, the DC goes up by 1. So the DCs, may or may not be in your favour as the keeper determines. Short weapons go compass points, but long weapons can sweep around. You need ammo for taking a shot with range. Little table, no success. 3 or more successes, the shot hits for 2 damage. So in your dice pool, how many successes did you get or something? Visibility, all the kind of the same as you'd expect. Talks about range. And then crafting is magic when you're a wizard, etc. Again, rival, magic table. Heavy craft being when you're fully magical, doing stronger magic. The armor, locations. Where do you hit on the enemy? Damage is pretty much determined by this table. Losing life and then dying. I go into this in the interview in a moment. And then there's a gear list. Nice art as well. The undergrade is where it takes place. Underdark, you could think. There's many other RPGs that create whatever rules they see fit, and then I just sit here and liken it to D&D because that's our common shared language, that's all. Black powdered weapons, so guns. And a list of extra details which won't come as too much of a surprise. You pick a quarterstaff and damage is 2, cost is 20 silver pieces. So you can have 4 weapons, I remember. Different kinds of ammo, different tool sets called kits here. What they actually are, medkit would be nice. And then into the spells section, and then a lot of weird names just to keep it different, then goes into what those names are. Target gains immunity to craft, which is the magic. Block. Your aura surrounds and binds the aura of the target in an unseen field. Targets may not craft, and you can use this once per encounter, and it lasts up to X amount of turns. And I'm sure playing this would make the words soon become memorable, and it's all in the book anyway. So all the different glim stuff. And then we have the monsters. Poison, regeneration, smog. So this is what path he is. He's north. He has 1 grit, 2 gate, 1 grit, 4 guts. Can move 5 or run 10. Claws for 1, bites for 2. Has armor 1 in all locations. And you just roll dice at each other. Consult a table. Do the damage it says. Like bite is 4 damage. And because they've only got like 3 health here or 12 health here, it's that beautiful randomness we like. And I think that's it. Yeah, so this is just a PDF, but the book itself is already lovely looking. And as I say, I'm about to enter an interview phase of this video. But what do I think of it? On the whole, I really like the fact that it's different. It's trying something new. It's trying something quick, easy, fast, and with a little bit more clarity and slowing down and doing the rules of how you build a dungeon, how you actually play. Give me this is what you do, then this is what you do. Now do this. Now do this. That's what I need. I've read it a couple of times, so I'm still like, yeah, but how do I play? Now, there is in the back of the book an adventure, which is still, maybe it's like so simple that it's meant to be obvious, but it's almost too underwritten. I'm like, no, walk me through it, please. That's what I would like. It does that with the character building, but not like right, now it's your turn. And I need some, now it's your turn, explanations of what I actually have to do. But yeah, when I was sent this, and it was basically a dungeon sprint, not a dungeon crawl, I thought, oh, you speedrun the dungeons. That sounds interesting. That sounds good. And because it's got a solo play, I desperately want to get my head around it so that I can solo play. But yeah, it's exciting, and I think you have to appreciate the effort that's gone into it, and now's our chance to shape it a little bit. So it's boiled down D&D, but for those fast, quick games. And now let's go talk to its creator. And here's the man himself, Keenan Antos. How are you doing, Keenan?
I'm doing quite well, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, excellent. So thanks for the product. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have a look through it. I want to know first from you, what was the pitch for this? What's the elevator pitch for this product?
Well, yeah, I would say the elevator pitch is we live in a time where time is scarce for a lot of folks, and sitting down at the table for extended periods, RPGs traditionally have a lot of prep involved. They can become quite elaborate. RPGs can take over your life, right? If you really want them to, which isn't a bad thing. But if you've got a family, if you've got kids, or you're, just busy, as a lot of folks are these days, it's like I found myself as a player struggling to find time. And so, I have a whole story around how this all unfolded. It was really inspired by a 5e campaign that the kids asked me to run, and getting, you know, new players who had never role played into 5th edition, and just the learnings that sort of came with ramping new players up into an RPG and what role playing is about. And after going through that process with the family, realized, man, there really is an opportunity here to just maybe streamline and simplify some things a little bit, so that you still get all of the value and the depth and the things that we love about role playing, but also can give you a little bit of time back, right? And so the pitch really is, I mean, that's where Dungeon Sprint came from, which is, you know, how do we, you know, take a 4-hour, you know, traditional RPG session and compress that into, say, 60 to 90 minutes, and also just make it easier for new players to approach and ramp up into.
Would you say it was roleplay dialed down?
I mean, I think especially nowadays with OSR and all of the like homebrew systems, it's like everybody who's really passionate about this stuff kind of already has their own system. And so what I really focused on were the mechanics and how to simplify and streamline those. Everybody's got their favorite set of lore. So I mean, I think RIPCRYPT really does, you know, mechanically plug into whatever set of lore that, you know, and backstory. And I think that's really where the true depth and richness of, it's really about the story, not the mechanics. And I wouldn't say that it, you know, it's we're dumbing down role playing at all. I would say that it's actually the converse. It's, you know, when you're in a session, and, you know, the most sort of a cliche example would be, you know, the wizard casts a spell, right? And the player's new, hasn't looked up that spell, doesn't know what it does, right? The whole game sort of gets set aside for 30 to 40 minutes while the player looks up the spell, has a conversation with the DM. The other players pick up their phones or sort of check out, go get a snack, right? And it's like the whole session just sort of got thrown sideways. And I find, you know, as both a DM and a player, that happens more often than not in games. And so I was like, well, how do I make, you know, magic lean and make it really simple so that, you know, players going into it know exactly, right, what the outcome's going to be, exactly mechanically what to roll. And even just, you know, I love polyhedron. I mean, I've been gaming since, geez, I was 8 years old. You know, I have an older brother that got me into it. So this isn't really about, you know, RIPCRYPT versus, you know, the I guess the long legacy of RPGs that are out there. This was really inspired really about maybe a phase I found myself in my own life, and also a younger generation coming up into this. Like when I was a player, you know, there weren't supercomputers in everybody's back pocket. The internet didn't exist. It really was the world of Stranger Things, right? It was an analog world. And we live in very different times now. And I think that's actually what the OSR is about, is people responding to all of these changes and demands for our attention and our time in the new world, and trying to find a way for RPGs to coexist or complement that. And so for me, that means faster mechanics, shorter sessions, you know, clarity, so that, you know, you can really play from memory and you don't have to get into the rule book like repeatedly once you sort of have a sense for the baseline of the game. That was kind of a long answer, but yeah, I definitely don't think I think there's a lot of sophistication in the mechanics of RIPCRYPT that are there really to simplify all of those things so that you can focus more on the story, more on that depth, more on the lore, more on the player interaction, and less on, like, you know, what it says on page 137 of the rule book about, you know, some spell somewhere, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So the basic system sort of says can be played solo, which is a cool thing, or between 2 to 8 players. 8 players sounds a lot, but you know, some people like that sort of thing. It's designed to keep game prep to a minimum, yes. So you've gone for a D8 system. What was the thought there?
That was one of the harder decisions. Like, I love my polyhedrals, right? I love a D20. But sitting at a table with a new player, I can't tell you how many times it was like, well, what die do I roll? What die do I roll? What die do I roll? Right. And there's a point where you're like, okay, let's, like, by just making a decision, narrowing the system to one dice, right, it removes that problem. So that was sort of step one. But I actually, when I first designed RIPCRYPT, it was D6 based. There are other D6 systems out there, obviously. And really, there's sort of this magical. So I'm actually a product designer by trade outside of this world. And in typography, there's this thing called the type grid. A baseline type grid basically uses increments of 4, and it's sort of a mathematical, what is it? There's like these magical mathematic algorithms. So divisions of 4, so 4, 8, 16, 20, 24, right? Like every type ramp in every newspaper is basically built on increments of 4. And if you kind of deconstruct some of the mechanics of RIPCRYPT, that's actually a core principle, the principle of 4. And it's useful because you can remember 4 things, right? You can remember 4 stats. You can remember, your 4 skills. You can remember. So it's also mathematically convenient when you apply it to tables, right? So 4 directions, north, south, east, west. And I looked at, like, D6s don't play into 4 as cleanly as D8.
Yeah.
And you also don't get quite as much upper end range, right, with like 2 or 3 D6 as you do 2 or 3 D8. And I liked the cleanliness of, like, also being able to roll a D8. The whole initiative system in RIPCRYPT uses north, south, east, west. Players basically have an alignment on a fate path. And so to run a turn of exploration, a delve turn, or a combat, you simply roll 1d8 that sets your direction, and players just take turns clockwise from there. That's called fate in the game. And, players also get a little bit of a benefit if they're aligned with fate. Like if they're of the north and the fate is of the north, it kind of plays into some of the story of the game as well.
Yeah, I like it. Sorry to interrupt. I really liked the sit all the north players around one side of the table, sit the south on this opposite, and then you actually. I like the idea of going around. Well, we're the southers, and we'll, you could get in infighting, but yeah, no, the initiative of that, I like that, and each compass point is a character type. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always loved alignment in D&D. There's a lot of options, right? But I was thinking, like, okay, how do I, like, kind of take character class and race and alignment and, like, kind of compress those things together a little bit so that it's like, well, if you're of the north, you have this kind of, I think it also plays into, reality. Like if you're of a particular demographic or geography, that does shape your values and who you are a little bit, right? And so, bringing that then into initiative, initiative's a hard challenge. I find as a DM, I often, especially when you get into the 6 to 8 player range, accidentally, forgetting players' turns. It's like, it can become a little bit challenging for a DM just to orchestrate a game. And so, yeah, if it's just always clockwise, the theory was that would simplify, and that actually probably more than anything held true when I brought the game to playtesting. I ran it at a convention, the Emerald City Comic Con here in Seattle, for 3 days. And yeah, that was actually one of the smoothest mechanics. I was surprised actually how well that worked. I didn't think it would work as well as it did.
Yeah, well, that's good. So we've got 4 abilities, like grit, grip, gate, glim. So can you explain those?
Yeah, I mean, games are supposed to be fun, and maybe it's just me, but I take a lot of joy in just the words, right, themselves. It does create a little bit of, like, learnability, right? Like, well, what does grit mean, right? How does this translate to what I know? What is gate, right? So you have to get past that, to reach a player. But you have that problem with all of the tried and true stats, right? Like dexterity, explaining that to a new player anyway. So you still have the new player challenge with terminology regardless. It's, I think increased a little bit with players who, have the bias of history with these games. There's a little bit of more resistance to new terms. But I feel like, dexterity it's super clear what that is, but it's not fun. It's very descriptive, but like gait is a little bit more fun. Glim is a little bit more mysterious, and so, and even the name RIPCRYPT, right? There's a little bit of humor and fun that I'm trying to introduce into the terminology, not just to be clever. It's also to it's a different system. It's a different thing. And how do we even just maybe not take it so seriously and have a little bit of fun with some of the words too?
Yeah, well, my videos for Shadow Dark and a few other things aren't out yet, but I get a bit deflated when I read it and it's just D&D without 2 stats or something. Whereas yours, I liked. It was refreshing. I know we're aiming for the same game and it's the game I love, but it's a new system in a way. We're rolling d8s for a change, and yeah, the turn initiative thing, it's fresh and original and quick, and it excites me more than let's just do D&D with less rules. Well, no, let's just throw your game out and play D&D because obviously it's better. I get frustrated by let's dumb down D&D. Well, no, I want to play D&D then. But yours is like, it's different, so yeah, I like it. It's a beautiful product thus far. I get the fact that there's changes to be made and you're going to embellish on it. But so far, everyone goes for black on white, at the moment, because obviously you don't have the money behind you to do full colour spreads. You'd be throwing money away. I am a printer. I'd know these reasons.
All right.
But yeah, roll tables, like you say, simplistic roll tables. Once you've learnt what each thing means, and like I've gone to the chambers room, we roll 1d8, 2d8 for the stronghold rooms and all the lair rooms, and so basically you've got your monsters very easily discovered by just throwing some dice as the game runner. I like it. It seems simplistic. You put 3 dice down. One's the turn counter, well, number 1 facing up. Then the trial difficulty. What does the difficulty actually alter in essence? The DCs are? Yeah,
there's first I have to give a shout out to Johnny Greenteeth, who did the cover for that book, and he's an amazing artist. It's brilliant. So I just there's a bunch of artists also that have contributed, and I'm just blessed to have so many creative folks helping contribute to this. We did want to keep it old school. We did want to keep it black and white. And yeah, certainly budget does play into that for sure. I would say with modern printing, it's gotten interesting because like it's almost harder to print in black and white nowadays than color in certain regards because everyth's digital. But it's definitely wanted to keep that chiaroscuro, for sure. And I think one of my favorite mechanics, it really is, it's like, how do you have a clock, right? You want some urgency. So turn counters matter, right? Because things like torches and lanterns and light, and player urgency versus, player autonomy, like you want a little bit of time pressure. And I feel like good DMs create that, right? But RIPCRYPT takes that into the mechanics and helps drive some urgency just with the counter. And the trial difficulty, to your other question, is really, the whole setting of RIPCRYPT is in the undergrade. So it's, there's this magical calamity called the drift, which is, this was written, frankly, during the pandemic. So there's a little bit of symbology where folks were, sheltering in place, right? And so I just kind of spun with that. And I was like, okay, well, everybody's living, in catacombs and labyrinths beneath the ancient realms that have, really fallen to ruin beneath the drift. Because the fates are at war. And so there's a little bit of lore. It's just enough to kind of explain, all right, why is so much of this setting underground or undergrade? And, my wife and I, we took a vacation. We went to Hawaii at one point, and we went into, was it Mexico? We went to the cenotes, and we were underground, right? Like in these ancient caverns. And I'm thinking, wow, like if I didn't have a guide, I would be lost in here forever, right? Like there's this like and there's like these maps right on the wall, and they're like these people who like went in to this literal dungeon filled with water and swamp and who knows, right? And they like mapped this thing out, right? So there's this cartography happening. And so I found a lot of inspiration just from the real world, which is like, okay, if I know this place and I'm familiar with it, it's easier, right? It's easier to get through. Like I have muscle memory. I know where the light switch is, right? I know how to move around in this space. If I'm just sort of new to it, right? It's a little bit harder. I'm still learning about this space. If I've never been here, it's completely unfamiliar. It's much harder, right? So you have that variable of like, do I know this space or not? Is it familiar to me? Is it on a map or not, right? Can I navigate it? And then you also have the variable of like weather, temperature, conditions, right? Things that are outside of your control. Morale is also like, so all of those things kind of play into trial difficulty, which ultimately is just a number, right? That the keeper sets on a D8 to represent the environment. Like how tough is it right now, right? And that can change room by room, as you progress through, a sequence of rooms, depending on the, it's like, you descend down a staircase and the temperature drops 8 degrees and suddenly it's, super cold. So trial difficulty goes up, right? Because things are getting icy and slick and you can see your breath, right? And you need to make sure your footing is stable. So it's like I really wanted the environment to have a personality and an impact on the players directly, and also conversely something that the bard can influence, right, through song, right? If someone sings a song and you're traveling, right, like it lifts the spirits, it lowers, it's like even though it's pouring rain and the conditions are miserable, someone is resisting that. And so mechanically in the game, right, you can adjust trial difficulty back. So players have skill that directly corresponds to influencing the conditions of the environment, which I think is critical to role playing. And also a lot of systems sort of don't have a solution for mechanically. So trial difficulty is really representing the environment. And that sets your target for your dice pool. Like, if you're going to try and jump the chasm, climb the wall, smash through the door, all of those things are impacting, that player agency and the difficulty target for your role. And then conversely, so that's a trial action, right? When you're trialing against the environment, there's also rival action, which is where you compare your score to, the rival. Like, so you're either targeting the environment or someone else, right? Typically in RPGs. And so that's where it's like, well, if this person has skill, and maybe they're more skilled than you, it should be harder, right? If they're less skilled than you, it's going to be a little easier for you. And so that's also where those targets, for a rival action will deviate up or down depending on, the skill of the target.
Yeah, Warhammer 40k has a similar table that if you equal it, so I was familiar with that, and a familiar thing was good for me. We have care and haste, which is like being careful and maybe lowering the DC and rushing and maybe, So that's kind of advantage and disadvantage, which is a understandable concept. Flip a coin for initiative to see whether the heroes go first or the monsters go first. Nice and easy. No arguments there. Morale, if at half health points, that calls for a morale check to see if maybe monsters run away or how they behave. Nice and easy. Attacking has edge and drag, whether you have the edge or I guess you're dragging, whatever. But yeah, that's a buff and a, whatever. I like that. Crafting isn't actually making things, is it? Crafting is like spell casting. Like area of effect, I took it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I borrowed from witchcraft. Just okay. Like again, this is wordplay, right? Yeah. But I was like, I don't want to just call it, it can't be arcane, it can't be the ether. Like there's Ars Magica has already completely defined an entire world and universe around magic. And so I was like, I want it to be a little bit cheeky, like a little bit, like lean magic, right? And something where it's like, anybody can kind of do a cantrip. Yeah, so I went with Glimcraft because I wanted to play off of, obviously the stat of Glim, which is what you use to conjure and use this ability. And then also, I think it's kind of a cool mechanic around aura, which is, if it's sort of like you have this aural presence, and if you focus really hard and you don't move, you can use heavy craft, which basically expands the range of your capability if you don't move. And that, yeah, you can target folks with craft outside of visibility, line of sight. Like you can just sort of sense their presence and target them, which also makes sense, in an environment undergrade where folks have maybe evolved to persist and survive there a little bit, right? They're more comfortable in the dark, depths underneath underground. So yeah.
You've got armor as different sections. Why have you split the areas up?
So that was inspired by Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which was my first RPG, first edition. Grammy Davis, it's one of my all-time favorite games of all time. I love like the grimdark fantasy setting. I love it's super crunchy, right? It's a really complex system, but I always loved the hit target or hit location aspect to that game. It's their solution is more complicated. So I was like, well, how do I simplify this but keep some of that realism, right? It's like I've always felt like armor class is very abstract, right? Yeah. It's like this abstract number. I don't know what it means. And how do you explain that again to a new player? But if I can tell you, look, you have a shield or you have a helmet and that protects your head, and then you have to figure out mechanically, okay, well, where is someone getting hit, right? And that does play into a dice pool system pretty well, because it's like, well, how many successes, right? So if I have one success and I rolled a 4, it's like, okay, that's both your hit location, right, and your one success. So, if there's armor there, you subtract that from your weapon damage and you're good. Like there's no rolling for damage. That's also determined by the weapon strength that you're wielding in combat. So the math's super easy. You're not slowing down gameplay by rolling, multiple times per sort of, combat session or combat turn. And then also, yeah, just with there's some cool realism I think that comes through. It's like, if you get hit in the arm versus the leg, it helps. There's a little bit of player strategy around, okay, how am I going to armor my character? Am I going to do that? And how does that play into, how they show up, with player autonomy in the game. I like the other mechanic that got added later after playtesting, which was, if you have multiple successes, like, what do you do with that? And so being able, it sort of represents like, wow, I really had a wild success here. And some dice pool systems leave that open to interpretation with the DM, which is great. In combat, though, I was like, well, that should be on the player to choose, right? So it's like, okay, well, I had 2 or 3 successes. All right, now you get to choose your hit location, right? Because like you're so skilled, right, that you're working around armor and you're targeting, right, strategically as you would if you were actually fighting someone. So it brings like a level of realism through a really simple mechanic. And I think that's kind of cool. I also just visually think it looks cool on a character sheet, right? Yeah. Like you want to have something visual there that's like, it's like, okay, this is my character and like how they're showing up.
Yeah. Can you explain the death mechanic to me? I flicked over it and I just didn't quite take it in.
Yeah. So if you take damage and you fall below or at 0 guts, so hit points are guts, which also plays off the G thing. But yeah, if you fall to 0 or below, you can't ever actually fall below 0. It's just like your player's unconscious. When your player's unconscious, they fall down, they're prone, and they're basically unable to defend themselves. There's a mechanic in there called what is it? Is it Heroes? I see. There's too many things to remember.
Yeah.
This is where the lack of sleep shows up. But like heroic, valor, which is like you can't, if there's another target near you that's like a threat, you're not going to just strike someone dead. You're going to target the threat first. So that's also built in there mechanically. But yeah, it's like so in the morale phase, right? Which there's 3 phases to combat. An unconscious hero basically trials their fate. So, when you make a character, you choose a fate path. So, and that's what determines your alignment, like we talked about. So if you're of the North, you would use your fate path ability, which is in that case, grit, and you would roll a normal trial for grit, which is going to give you 2 dice, right? And if you succeed, you basically live another turn. Heroes, if you have multiple successes, you can have miraculous things, right? Like fate has completely like healed you, given you, 1 to 2 points of guts back, and your hero can stand up. So there's a little bit of variance there depending on how successful. If you don't pass, you die.
Yeah.
So, it is pretty, it can be unforgiving, but I also think that's part of what I wanted is, in the system there to be real consequences. Like combat is deadly. Getting stabbed with a knife can kill you. And like some of these, it's like, oh, like I lost 2 hit points of 35, but I just got stabbed with a knife. Like that just doesn't correlate with reality, right? And so I wanted something that it's like if you're going to get into combat, you should think twice. It's not something to take lightly, and you got to get in and get out as quickly as possible, which also creates some of that urgency, and also emphasizes the importance of armor in the game.
Yeah. And like the book says, everything you need is in here. There's a short adventure in the back. You can reuse those maps as much as you want, and they're fairly easy to make up your own versions. So how long would you say this took you to get to this point?
Wow. Yeah, I think it's been about 2.5 years. I have a timeline somewhere, but it actually was inspired again by Stranger Things. The kids were watching it. It was like August of 2020 or 2021, something like that. And they're like, let's get a 5e game going. And RIPCRYPT was actually, when we like to name our guild, right? And they were all about, like the Hellfire Club, right? So I was like, okay, we need a club name. So RIPCRYPT was like originally our like guild name for our 5e game. And I created like a DM screen, with magnets, and like all the things so I could run this with the kids. And that's sort of, then I posted I think a photo of the game screen on Instagram, and someone was like, this is the perfect name for a lightweight RPG, and hey, you're a product designer, you should do this. And I guess that's sort of what set me on this path. But yeah, it's been about 2.5, 3 years of lots of late nights, weekends.
Yeah.
My poor wife never sees me, a lot goes into this stuff. And but yeah, I'm like, it really has always been my dream, ever since I was a kid to do this. And so I'm trying to live the dream. Yeah,
and having physically in your hand even in this version must be awesome.
Yeah, it's an amazing feeling, right? Going from like this thought bubble idea, right, to like manifesting something physically, like, and to have the privilege of this conversation with you, like halfway
someone else has seen it.
It's amazing. Like it's just such an incredible time we live in. And I got all sorts of ideas for where I want to go with this, but the rule book is like kind of the MVP, or the I don't know, minimum viable product of RIPCRYPT, right? Because I'm just one person. But I'd love to do a box game with tiles and minis. Like one of my favorite games is Advanced Hero Quest, which is kind of a half-baked rule system, and GW was responding to Hero Quest and trying to expand on that. But like, I just always loved the visual sort of the interlocking tiles and the suspense of like, you don't know what's around that corner yet, and sort of progressive disclosure of an underworld, the way that game really brought it to the table in a way no other game had before. Dungeon Quest is another one. There's so many, but I just really love that game. And so there's some inspiration, you know, especially in the like hazards and traps section of the crypt design within RIPCRYPT are, you know, definitely a shout out to Advanced Hero Quest and some of the early GW stuff.
Yeah. So tell me about a headache that was in the journey.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, like I said, when I first started, it was D6 based, and yeah, bringing that to the table. You know, there's a familiarity everyone has with six-sided dice, but it's also kind of a funny thing. Like as a designer, there's certain quirks I have like that I find just annoying, like when players roll dice and they fall off the table.
Yeah,
like it's
me
a small
too.
thing,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's another thing that just like derails gameplay, right? Like now the cat's running off with your dice somewhere, right? Like it gets crazy, and now you got to have a tray right on the table, which takes up space. So like now someone's knocking over a drink so they can roll dice, and you know, like if you roll dice and you just think about it, the physics and the mechanics, right, of that, certain dice are gonna more more often than not fall off the table than others. A D20 actually will roll off the table more than any other die, right? It's almost a sphere. So the surface friction of that, and that was actually part of how I landed on D8, was because you throw them and they tumble nicely, but they land squarely, and they aren't going to fly off the table as much as a six-sided die even. So that was part of it. Also, yeah, the divisible by 4 with the tables and all those things. And early on, also, I had the system, especially with rival action. So when you would roll, it was like the keeper would roll basically for the hostile, and the player would roll for their hero, right? And so now, and then you would compare pools, right, to determine outcomes or success and failure. And I got feedback actually at the convention that was interesting and kind of GURPS like, but also slowed things down. And I thought long and hard about that one because I mean it was almost a complete rewrite mechanically to take that feedback. But I was like, but this player is right. Like this game's supposed to be fast, and I really should do the work to optimize it. That added like 3 months of work, just that change, right? But you know, and also most recently, so one of the products that I'm working on is I'm calling it the control board, but it's a game screen, right, for RIPCRYPT. And initially I had it sort of in portrait format, you know.
Okay.
And so like I guess 3 panels in portrait. And you know, the community on our Discord was like, hey, like, you know, what if you rotated that landscape so it's a lower profile, it's less of a visual barrier to players? And I was like, yeah, I really should have thought of that. But I had to like completely rotate the design, and we're talking about really detailed columns and tables, right? So that was more recent. I think that added at least 3 weeks
yeah,
to getting that done. But it's a much better design now. It's kind of cool. It's super low profile, and just it's more almost like a dashboard, right, than a screen, right? It's not about hiding dice or anything. It's more just like a quick reference that's just there for the keeper when they're running this stuff.
Yeah. So when are we looking at an official kickstart?
Yeah, we're officially live right now. What are there? 24 days to go, I think.
But it won't be this version, will it? That I have, because there's.
Yeah, you've got the pre-release, which is limited run. I only did 20 copies of those, and just to get the word out to folks. But yeah, I'm definitely taking feedback. So if you have thoughts and feedback, would love to incorporate that into the final. But yeah, I mean, otherwise though, things are pretty close to production ready, right? So as soon as ideally we get funded. Trying to keep the funding humble, really just to the cost to produce this thing and get it out to folks. But yeah, I think we've got 20 some days left on the Kickstarter. I think we're about 75-ish% funded already. So yeah, things are going pretty well so far.
So you've got in the back of your head how to expand this, plans for the future. Don't expect you to talk about it, but you know where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk a little bit. Like the game focuses right now primarily on the undergrade, so I do want to do an overgrade expansion that really talks about the realms and gets more into the lore, right? But it's sort of like optional, right? It's like, hey, if you're into this lore, check it out. Um, I'm really into hex crawl, so I mechanically want to look at that, and there's so many systems that just have really cool ideas around travel and survival, and so I want to look at like sort of RIPCRYPTifying hex crawl, and looking at overland exploration. I also have a mechanic for the drift, right, which is how do weather patterns show up and influence how players are able to traverse overgrade. So I think there's some cool stuff there for sure. I've been asked repeatedly for some localized editions. There's a lot of folks in Italy specifically that want a translated version, which I would love to do. Obviously, that's just monetary and budget and distribution. But if we get enough traction and success with the game, I would love to do those things. A French edition as well. There's been requests for that. And then, yeah, I mean, like we talked about, maybe one day a box game with minis and some tiles. I also have this other idea of doing like a pub crawl, like travel version, because the game is simple enough that you could, carry it in your back pocket theoretically, which would, it's kind of a thing here in the States, like, going to the pub, bringing some games. It's like, well, bring something cool, bring the RIPCRYPT to the pub,
Yeah. Yeah, nice. Thank you so much for talking to me. And we'll put the Kickstarter details in the description, obviously, and I hope to see how this all transpires, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Robodad. This is amazing. Really appreciate you.